Casting, one of the most difficult and risky steps in the film industry. A good choice can create a masterpiece, but just a small mistake can make the whole film collapse. Casting is not only a technical process, but also an art of feeling and intuition. Sometimes directors see something in someone that no one else sees, and the result is a performance that changes the world's perspective. But sometimes they believe they have found the true love for the role, only to receive a disastrous failure. In this video, we will look back at films that caused fierce controversy right from the announcement of the cast. There were choices that caused strong opposition from the audience. But then when the film was released, all prejudices were erased. And there are also cases, unfortunately, the results are exactly what people feared. For better or worse, all of these roles are memorable because they illustrate a fun fact of Hollywood. No one can know for sure what will happen until the lights come on. When Daniel Craig was cast as James Bond in Casino Royale, it was a shock. People were used to Bond being the dark-haired, suave, and dashing Bond, and Craig was a blonde, known for his gritty, psychological roles in Layer Cake and Munich. It was a risky choice, but exactly what the producers wanted. After 2002's Die Another Day, a film criticized for being too flashy, too CGI-heavy, and lacking depth, the studio wanted to bring Bond back to a more grounded, complex, and emotional Bond. A more human Bond. Producer Barbara Broccoli and director Martin Campbell wanted to revive the franchise, but not everyone was on board. Shortly after Craig was announced, a website called craignotbond.com appeared, criticizing the studio for firing Pierce Brosnan and replacing him with a short, weird-looking blonde guy. The press described Craig as having a pale, flat face and two big ears, and the hatred was so widespread that his mother received hate mail. Craig wasn't the only choice. The list included Hugh Jackman, Clive Owen, Christian Bale, Carl Urban, and Henry Cavill. Ultimately, Martin Campbell felt only Cavill and Craig were up to the task. And then came Casino Royale. The result? It silenced all the critics. Craig delivered a James Bond that was more brutal, emotionally complex, and, most importantly, human than ever before. He trained in martial arts, weapons, and studied Ian Fleming's novels to understand the character. The result was a Bond that was both powerful and vulnerable. Utterly genuine. The film was a huge success both commercially and critically, and Daniel Craig would be Bond for nearly 15 years to come. When Robert Downey Jr. was cast as Tony Stark in 2008's Iron Man, Hollywood erupted in three different reactions. The first was from within Marvel, particularly Kevin Feige and director Jon Favreau. They believed Downey was Tony Stark straight out of the comics. Robert's best and worst moments were in public, Favreau once said. He had to learn to balance the light and the dark, and that's Tony Stark. But not everyone at Marvel was so optimistic. Some executives worried that it was a risky choice. Downey's career had all but collapsed after a series of drug scandals, arrests, and a reputation for being unbankable that made major studios wary. Giving someone like him a leading role, and in a project that would launch the Marvel Cinematic Universe, was like betting the company on a losing battle. Iron Man is not a brand as famous as Spider-Man or X-Men, so if it fails, Marvel will almost certainly not have a second chance. And then there is the audience. The reaction of fans at the time was clearly divided. Many acknowledged that Downey was a talented actor, but were not sure he could keep himself long enough to complete the role, let alone lead an entire cinematic universe. Others believed that it was his fallen past that made him the perfect choice, because Tony Stark is also a genius torn between light and darkness, between arrogance and the need for redemption. When filming began, Robert Downey Jr. did not just act, he lived the character. He improvised many of his own lines, infusing Tony Stark with his intelligence, wit, and characteristic arrogance. The result was a character who not only wore iron armor, but also had a rare soul and depth. The story of Tony Stark, an arrogant genius who learns to be altruistic, is also the redemption story of Robert Downey Jr. in real life. Iron Man was released and immediately became a sensation. The film was not only a huge box office success, but also received critical acclaim, opening a new era for superhero movies. From a crazy gamble, Marvel made the right bet. Downey not only saved his own career, but also built the greatest film empire of the 21st century. And since then, Robert Downey Jr. is no longer a failure remembered for scandal. He became Tony Stark, the man who changed all of Hollywood with his own rebirth. When Christopher Nolan announced that Heath Ledger would play the Joker in The Dark Knight, Hollywood was stunned. A man once famous for his romantic roles in 10 Things I Hate About You or A Knight's Tale was now chosen to play the craziest villain in comic book history. Batman fans at that time had only one reaction: no way. On film forums, a series of comments appeared. Everyone thought Ledger was too young, too handsome, and too gentle to be the Joker. Jack Nicholson, who played the role in 1989, was a true legend, while Ledger was just a guy from teen movies. People laughed at Nolan's decision, saying that this would be the biggest mistake in the history of Batman casting. But perhaps it was those doubts that made Ledger more determined than ever. He locked himself in his hotel room for weeks, cutting off contact with the outside world. During that time, he developed the Joker's voice, laugh, walk, and demeanor. He recorded every twisted, insane thought of the character in a private diary. Ledger reread the comics, studied different versions, but then abandoned them all. He didn't want to imitate, he wanted to create a completely new Joker, more realistic, more terrifying, and more haunting than anything audiences had ever seen. Throughout filming, Ledger maintained that same crazy energy, even when the camera stopped rolling. He lived the character, breathed the character, and gradually no one could tell who was Heath Ledger and who was Joker anymore. When The Dark Knight was released, all the previous criticisms disappeared. Ledger's performance silenced audiences around the world. His Joker was not just a villain, but a real nightmare. Smart, charming, insane, and haunting. Not only did he threaten Gotham City, but he also made viewers wonder about the nature of evil, the chaos within themselves. It was heartbreaking when Heath Ledger passed away suddenly before the film was released. His death from a drug overdose stunned the world, and his performance became an immortal legend. He was posthumously awarded the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor, and since then, no one has been able to surpass him. Heath Ledger's portrayal of the Joker is proof that sometimes the most controversial choices bring the greatest results. An actor can change the world if he dares to go all the way. Ledger did it and left a legacy forever. When Anne Hathaway was cast as Selina Kyle, aka Catwoman, in Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight Rises, fans were initially skeptical. Hathaway, a talented actress known for her soft and feminine roles in The Princess Diaries and The Devil Wears Prada, seemed like a pretty safe choice, maybe too safe, for a character known for her seductive, mysterious, and somewhat dangerous charm like Catwoman. Most of the public was still haunted by Michelle Pfeiffer's sexy and edgy image in the 1992 version of Batman Returns. So Hathaway's innocent and too gentle image made many doubt whether she could fully embody the role. When the first images of Hathaway in the Catwoman costume were released, reactions were even more divided. An article in The Hollywood Reporter recorded the opinion of audience member Holly Duffy. "I'm sure it won't be as bad as I thought, but Catwoman doesn't look like that. Anne Hathaway is too cute to play her." Meanwhile, The Atlantic also commented that she was too sweet and lacked the sharpness required for the character. However, Hathaway proved all the skeptics wrong. She seriously entered the process of preparing for the role, practicing different martial arts, applying a strict fitness regimen, carefully studying every gesture, gait, and voice. Hathaway once shared that this was the most physically demanding role of her career, and she had to work twice as hard to achieve the demeanor of a female thief who was both strong and sexy. In addition, she also took inspiration from the star Hedy Lamarr, a woman famous for her mysterious beauty and timeless intelligence, to build the image of Catwoman to be more intelligent, proactive, and profound. When The Dark Knight Rises was released, all the initial criticism was gone. Hathaway received critical acclaim, many praising her for bringing a sexy and sharp Catwoman, the perfect blend of villain and hero. She convinced audiences not only with her looks, but also with her psychological depth. A woman living in a moral gray area, both pragmatic and human. The role opened a new chapter in Hathaway's career, helping her to affirm that she was not only Hollywood's sweet girl, but also one of the most versatile actresses of her generation. When John Wayne was cast as Genghis Khan in The Conqueror, 1956, it was perhaps one of the most baffling casting decisions in Hollywood history. Wayne, the iconic American cowboy, with his towering gait, gravelly voice, and Western demeanor, was chosen to play the 13th century Mongol emperor in an epic that legendary producer Howard Hughes wanted to turn into a historical masterpiece. The idea, at least on paper, raised eyebrows. This was the heyday of John Wayne's career. He was Hollywood's most powerful star, able to pick any role he wanted, and for some reason, he really wanted to play Genghis Khan. Back then, the concept of fan backlash, or negative reactions from fans, was virtually non-existent. But even so, many in the industry recognized this as a strange choice. Variety magazine tried to be positive at the time, writing, "The combination of John Wayne and Susan Hayward more than makes up for any casting inaccuracies." But not everyone agreed. A film review by Sight and Sound was blunt in its review of the film. The story is disjointed and lacking in dramatic weight. Wayne, despite shouting his ambitious lines, is just a likable bandit trying to play emperor. The New York Times went further, calling Wayne's performance accidentally amusing. Although Wayne was serious and committed to the role, everything seemed to work against him. His American accent, his stilted pronunciation, his cowboy demeanor, all of it made the audience see John Wayne in Mongolian garb. He wasn't Genghis Khan, he was John Wayne playing Genghis Khan. The result? The film was a total disaster. Critically, it was seen as a joke. Commercially, it was a huge failure. The stilted dialogue, unconvincing acting, and off-key makeup made it a classic example of how bad casting can ruin a film. Worse still, The Conqueror had a tragic backstory. Many of the cast and crew, including John Wayne, later contracted cancer. The cause was said to be filming near a nuclear test site in Nevada, where the soil and dust were still radioactive. This chilling truth made the film not just an artistic accident, but a real curse in the history of American cinema. The World Is Not Enough, 1999, the 19th film in the James Bond series, marked Pierce Brosnan's third time as the suave 007. The story revolves around conspiracies involving oil pipelines, nuclear weapons, and a strange villain who is immune to pain. Denise Richards was cast as Dr. Christmas Jones, a brilliant nuclear physicist who later becomes Bond's ally and, of course, his lover. It sounds interesting. But when the film was released, Richards' role became one of the most criticized casting decisions in James Bond history. Denise Richards was a rising star at the time. She was famous for Starship Troopers and Wild Things, with her fiery, sexy beauty, a classic Bond girl. However, casting her as a genius nuclear scientist left audiences in disbelief. Richards' performance was considered forced and unconvincing, and her dialogue, though written in a serious style, made audiences laugh because it sounded like a high school student trying to sound smart. Salon critic Charles Taylor wrote, "Richards tries to project authority, but the result is a clumsy and awkward performance, like a student trying to convince a teacher that she understands." AV Club's Nathan Rabin was even more scathing. "Richards plays a nuclear physicist, but you don't have to be a scientist to realize that she looks more like a San Diego aerobics instructor than a scientist." Variety concluded coldly, "Denise Richards is the most unconvincing nuclear physicist in the history of cinema." Of course, the fault isn't entirely Richards's. She didn't write the script, nor did she decide on the character's appearance. The producers of the Bond series at that time still prioritized glamour over authenticity. Christmas Jones was not built as a real scientist, but more like a model placed in a laboratory just to create visual balance for Bond. That does not mean Denise Richards is a bad actress, though. In Starship Troopers or Wild Things, she showed her true strengths, both sexy and sharp within the framework of the role. But in the James Bond world, where audiences expect sophistication and an air of mystery, the character of Christmas Jones became an unintentional joke. As a result, although The World Is Not Enough was not a financial disaster, Denise Richards' role is still considered one of Hollywood's classic casting mistakes. And to this day, more than 2 decades later, very few people are willing to reevaluate the role seriously. This reminds me of another controversy, just as dramatic. In 1994, Tom Cruise was cast as the vampire Lestat in Interview with the Vampire, and once again, public opinion exploded. Fans of Anne Rice's novel, The Vampire Chronicles, thought Cruise was completely unsuitable. Even Anne Rice herself was vehemently opposed. According to a 1994 Esquire article, when Rice showed up at a book signing, she witnessed hundreds of fans chanting, "Not Tom Cruise, not Tom Cruise." She thought Cruise was too American, too clean, and would turn Lestat into a run-of-the-mill action hero. Anne Rice had wanted names like Jeremy Irons, John Malkovich, and Rutger Hauer, the people who inspired her to write the character. She also publicly criticized Warner Brothers and producer David Geffen, saying they had committed the biggest mistake in the history of Hollywood casting. Cruise didn't give up, however. He read every page of the novel, studying Lestat's speech patterns, gestures, and expressions. When the film was released, the results stunned everyone. Interview with the Vampire was a huge success, and Cruise's performance received rave reviews. The New York Times wrote that he absolutely nailed the role. Anne Rice later issued a public apology to Cruise, admitting that he was the perfect choice for Lestat, a happy ending, and a reminder that sometimes the audience isn't always right. It may seem odd to some that I'm including Johnny Depp's performance as Jack Sparrow here. After all, it's now one of Hollywood's most iconic roles, and one that no one else has been able to replace. But when Disney began casting Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl, the casting of Johnny Depp was a big question mark for both the filmmakers and the studio executives. Audiences at the time probably didn't care, as it was simply Disney's attempt to turn a popular Disneyland ride into a blockbuster. But within the industry, the news came as a surprise. Depp was known for his abstract art house films, which were critically acclaimed but not profitable. A Newsweek article from more than 20 years ago stated, "When news broke that Depp was taking on a pirate film, the buzz in Hollywood was that he must be broke, and that after years of pursuing his art, he had finally sold out to Disney." In fact, the idea of making a pirate movie was considered crazy at the time. Films set at sea were expensive, complicated, and rarely successful, unless they were called Titanic and directed by James Cameron. The disastrous failure of 1995's The Cruel Island all but buried the genre for nearly a decade. But producer Jerry Bruckheimer believed that Depp could bring something new, someone rebellious enough, different enough to make Disney's pirate movies unique. And when Johnny Depp showed up on set with a completely different look and demeanor, Disney was in for a shock. Executives were horrified when they saw the first footage. They even wondered if Depp was drunk and considered adding subtitles to his lines. According to Depp, Michael Eisner, the chairman of Disney at the time, said, "He's ruining the movie." Depp took inspiration from rock legend Keith Richards and combined it with the image of a wild, rugged pirate. His portrayal, at once brash, humorous, and a little feminine, made the studio worry that it would be too eccentric for Disney's intended family audience. But Depp believed in his choice. He stuck to his style, sticking to the Jack Sparrow image he had created, despite studio pressure. As it turned out, he was right. It was that difference that made Jack Sparrow one of the most memorable movie characters of all time. The film was not only a huge box office success, but also a critical one. Johnny Depp was even nominated for an Oscar for Best Actor, a rarity for a role in a commercial adventure film. He transformed a seemingly simple, stereotypical character into a pop culture icon. And from then on, Jack Sparrow became more than just a pirate on screen. He became the soul of the entire Pirates of the Caribbean franchise. Snow White and the Huntsman, 2012, directed by Rupert Sanders, is an attempt to recreate the classic fairy tale in a darker, more mature, and action-packed way. The film is expected to inherit the resounding success of Alice in Wonderland, 2010, a work that unexpectedly brought in over $1 billion in global revenue. With its epic scale, dark tones, bloody battles, and dark magic, Snow White and the Huntsman is considered a bold step forward in the fairy tale, fantasy action genre. Charlize Theron plays Queen Ravenna, a cruel woman obsessed with youth and beauty. Meanwhile, the role of Snow White was given to Kristen Stewart, a star who had just emerged from the global craze of Twilight. At that time, Stewart was one of the most commercially valuable actresses in Hollywood, and her casting as the warrior princess, who is destined to overthrow the evil queen, initially seemed like a logical choice. But in reality, it was a role that was ill-suited for Kristen Stewart. Audiences and critics quickly realized that her performance lacked the emotional depth and charisma needed for an iconic character like Snow White. This was no longer the innocent girl lulled to sleep in the woods, but the leader of a rebellion. However, Stewart failed to convey the warmth, heroism, or conviction that the role required. Lisa Kennedy of the Denver Post put it bluntly, "We can see Snow White's heroics through her dark eyes, but certainly not through Stewart's performance." That's the core problem. Stewart has depth, but her acting style has traditionally tended toward the quiet, introspective side, which worked so well in Twilight and Adventureland. In Snow White and the Huntsman, however, that attitude makes Snow White confused, passive, and uninspiring. Instead of inspiring people to rebel, her character makes it hard for audiences to believe that anyone would actually follow her into battle. To be fair, though, Kristen Stewart is not a bad actress. The problem lies in the way the character is written and shaped. The script doesn't give her much room to develop, from weak princess to brave commander, making Snow White's entire journey feel rushed and unconvincing. As a result, Snow White and the Huntsman still made a significant amount of money at the box office, but Kristen Stewart's Snow White became a classic example of Hollywood miscasting. Stewart didn't ruin the movie, but she couldn't save it either, and her performance became proof that one wrong casting choice can change the audience's emotional experience.